to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Kathryn Andries.
Each week, as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose, you'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Welcome to Spirit's Journey. We are coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. You can also find us on iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and TalkStream Live. We're here in the Heartland holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Kathryn. Welcome, everyone. Well, if you have kids or you're interested in education, you want to tune in today because we're going to have an amazing discussion with Jude LaClaire, who is a professional counselor, educator, and author. She's going to bring to us today a depth and breadth of over 45 years of professional experience working with people in different ways outside of the box. Dr. LaClaire skillfully integrates family systems, neurobehavioral approaches, dream and imagery work, holistic psychotherapy, and personality type. She works with people of all ages, life cycles, lifestyles, cultural, and spiritual backgrounds. She provides a safe environment where people can release trauma, emotional and physical pain, acquire tools to live happier, fuller, and more empowered lives. And one thing I'm super excited to talk with everybody about today is that Jude LaClaire is also the author of Life Weaving. And this is a 5-book, 3-CD series on holistic problem solving. For 10 years, she has written a monthly mental health article for Wellness Magazine, and currently contributes to Evolving, a guide for conscious living. She is available for individual, family, and couple counseling, and she's going to talk about all that today. So welcome, Jude.
Hi, Jude.
Well, I am so excited because, as you know, my husband and I, we have a 13-year-old. We've been educators for many, many years, and we have seen the flaws of the current educational system and all the wonderful things that you bring to the world and to hopefully the educational world if they accept it. So I want to begin by asking what motivated you to write the Life Weaving education curriculum?
Okay. Actually, the beginning of my journey as an educator was that for 6 years I was an elementary education teacher. And so during that period of time, of course, I learned to deal with children of all ages and learned about education. It was clear that that really wasn't my best call. It wasn't my call. That was not my call. And I went a degree in counseling, but I never really forgot that I was primarily, even as a teacher, as a counselor, that I'm an educator. And my history is that I grew up in the actually aftermath of World War II, and it was a very different kind of society, fairly rigid. Everybody knew the rules. Everybody knew what to do. The schools, the churches, the society, pretty much were in sync about what the expectations might know. That in the 60s, things kind of blew open. And things were being questioned, right? Rules were being questioned. People were beginning to ask, what are we doing? How are we educating? What are we doing in, for instance, in all of our societal institutions? And so myself, having been a teacher and I have a daughter, a grown daughter, and in some ways, the more choices a person has in a society, the more it demands of us to be what I would call self-regulating, to take responsibility. So if you live in a free democratic society, you have more personal responsibility to regulate yourself because the culture is not regulating you. Does that make sense?
Oh, total sense.
Absolutely.
Right. So basically, there were some other psychologists, one of them, Albert Bandura, that talked a lot about what he called self-efficacy or self-regulation. And the fact is that if we don't have that, we can't bounce back from failure. We can't deal with obstacles or challenges very well because the outer world then starts overcoming us, overwhelming us, and we don't have anything inside of us. So when I went back to get my Ph.D. in 1992, I decided that the thing I really wanted to talk about and learn about and teach people about was what I would call a more holistic educational approach to problem solving. If you think about it, life is a problem, right? Everything in life is a problem to be solved, right?
Exactly.
Right? So regardless of what we're doing, we're always learning. And so how do you solve a problem? How do you take that idea of starting with an issue that you need to learn, whether you're a little tiny person and you're learning to walk or tie your shoes, or you're learning how to read, or you're learning how to get along with others? Everything is a learning process, isn't it?
Oh, of course.
And so, so my idea was that I wanted to really create a system, and I decided I think what I really need to do is write a curriculum for elementary school teachers to really help people and children in today's diverse society live with a high degree of personal responsibility and self-regulation, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, that's why I fell in love with your curriculum, because it made so much sense, and it is so lacking in today's educational system. I mean, I taught elementary for 13 years. Actually, I've taught also middle and high school for several years as well. And that is the main problem, I think, that teachers are struggling with, and kids are as well, is how do we, discipline them, give them structure? Because, the teachers more and more have their hands tied behind their back in terms of, bringing in their own understandings and working with kids. And so it's become a hindrance to teachers teaching, and as well, it's become a hindrance to the kids learning because, especially with technology over, how do we, it's a free world. They have phones when they're in kindergarten. So how do we even now deal with teaching them self-regulation with technology?
Right, exactly. And I do think that everything that I've learned or you've learned in our lives, we can see that our children, and therefore as they become adults and young adults, I don't work with children any longer, but I definitely work with, usually I have a couple of 15-year-olds, but mostly I have 18 and up. But I see them struggling with these same issues. So they're very happy to learn some of these skills, right? And basically what you're helping people learn is how to discover their own personal resources. So, I think about how we learn. I use Carl Jung's idea of personality theory. Sensing and intuition is how we take in information. Thinking and feeling are the ways that we make decisions. And so that's kind of like, if you will, the compass of it's the cognitive map that we have. So I use personality type, and there's ways to teach it to younger children. Adolescents love it. And so I really kind of try to introduce people to a way, and even little ones, to think about how they can look at their own particular personality, and that they can learn about how they can use that compass of sensing and intuition, thinking and feeling as a cognitive map for how to do problem solving.
Well, and that's interesting because one of the tools I use, to help people understand their personality, there's so many different things out there, but I use tools like astrology, numerology, which would be a harder sell to schools, right? Because people still think astrology is something crazy, but personality typing is more acceptable.
Yes. Well, and I don't know if you know this or not, but Carl Jung, who some of your listeners may be aware of, some not, was a psychiatrist who basically delved into many, many kinds of things, including astrology, including he was kind of ridiculed Freud. He and Freud differed quite a bit, but he looked at many, many different kinds of things, including all different kinds of cultures. And so, interestingly, there are some books that are written about astrology and its relationship to personality type, because there is a relationship, obviously, because if you get a reading, then you'll see that your personality type is really kind of just another way of looking at that. It's another way, an interesting way. It's another way to describe your your basic predispositions in this lifetime. So I think Jung was quite aware of those sorts of things, and he looked at what he called the archetypes, right, the repeating patterns within society, within personal behavior, looking at art and music and story and so on, and came up with his view of personality type, which a lot of people are familiar with. They're probably particularly familiar with introversion and extroversion. And then talking about, like I said, the 4 functions, sensing and intuition. How do I take in information? Am I a more sensory-based person that is practical, pragmatic in the moment, get things done? Or am I a big-picture person? Am I a person that kind of looks at the whole thing and tries to put the pieces together? And those are 2 very different ways of learning, different ways. And as a teacher...
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it boils down to this whole area of self-awareness that is not being taught. We're born with this guidebook that tells us about ourselves, and we are, but it's encoded, right, in understanding your aspects and so forth. And so that's been my whole push. I've worked with adults for years, helping them understand themselves. And if we can get this into kids, this knowledge of who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my gifts? That is a huge plus that could get them going in life on the right foot.
Yes, and I do think that self-knowledge helps us in that process of self-regulation. And that if we look at for instance, using Carl Jung's personality type, we also can look at how we learn and how we make decisions, which also is self-knowledge, right? And also helps us to understand how we get along with other people, how different people interact differently because of their predispositions, who they are. They say if you don't know what an extrovert's thinking, you aren't listening. If you don't know what an introvert's thinking, you're not asking. So those are different personalities. We know that, don't we?
Yeah. That's just nice how you put it.
Yeah. So, extroverts tend to process out loud. So, for instance, I remember in my classroom, you ask a question. The extroverted kids' hands were up. They were talking, yeah. And the introvert sitting there knew the answer. But if you call them, they might hesitate. They might look down, look around, but then they would give you the answer. They always usually had the answer, but they weren't necessarily volunteering. So I didn't really know that at the time I was teaching, but later on, looking back, I realized that different children were responding in different ways. Well, think about this. If you help a child understand, geez, I'm an introvert. I'm not a failure because I'm not, everyone in a real gregarious, outgoing way. Okay? Extrovert. I need to have everything out there. I need to process out loud. I can't keep quiet all the time. So if a teacher knows that, if a parent knows that, they understand that the extroverted child needs to process out loud, typically, and the introverted child needs some time to think about it. They need that downtime. They need to maybe take a moment before they answer and go inside and process. So if we understand that, and the child understands that, then they're not going to feel good or bad. They're just going to say, oh, this is good about me. This is good about another person, right?
Yeah.
And one interesting thing I heard recently, which I found to have truth in it, is when we're talking about being an introvert or an extrovert, somebody was saying it's really how you recharge after you've kind of been out there.
Yes,
so like for
exactly.
me, I've always found myself in leadership positions and teaching positions. And yet after I've been at a big event, with a lot of people, then I need to kind of go into my cave to recharge.
Right.
And then somebody was saying, well, if you're an extrovert, if you needed to recharge after that, you'd want to go to a party or get together with a group of friends or something like that. So that really helped me understand more too, because that I had a little bit of a misconception about being introverted and extroverted.
No, I think that's a perfect, good, and excellent way to think about it. And if you think about personality type, and this is, you think about Carl Jung, he understood everything was really energy. And even though he died in 1961, he had a pretty sophisticated idea of this thing that all of these things around us are energy. So it is true that if you think about how we process information, how we interact with the inner and outer world, it does takes a different kind of energy. So an introvert has to be energized by going in, even though you may be excellent at things, it takes more energy for you. An extrovert does it. It charges them. I do it. You do it. I'm an introvert. You're an introvert. It takes energy from you. I love it, but I have to take downtime then. Mm-hmm. So if a child knows that, and if a teacher or parent knows that, then how much farther ahead of the game are we in terms of being able to help children self-regulate, and for us to also teach them that and to understand how they process, how they... Actually, one of my books in my curriculum is called Using the Compass, which is about this very topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, and actually, I was reading an article, Your Rules of the Road. You referred to Albert Bandura, who
Correct.
had some theories on self-regulation. I thought it was really interesting because you were talking about how you felt like these ideas were really important in a democratic and free society. So can you talk a little bit about, as we start training these kids to be self-regulated as they're in the school system and as they become adults and they become voting adults, how that plays into it?
Well, I think that we're living right now, yes, in a more so probably than any other time of history, a global world, a diverse, multicultural world. And so if our kids can be aware of themselves, they can also be then aware and appreciative of other cultures, of other kinds of people, say of other types, whatever, and they have a much better idea of how to interact because they know themselves better, right? They know their skills, they know their talents, they know their weak spots as well. And they know that, guess what, I know I have to learn from people that are sensing types because they're very practical. I have a big idea and they do it. Well, for those people that ask me those questions, because sometimes I don't have the practical, hands-on kind of how is it going to work. I've learned that, but I learn it from people that have that kind of more innate predisposition. So I think that, don't you think that working with other people is key to how we make a society work? But we can't work with other people if we don't know ourselves very well and we don't have a sense of their knowledge and appreciation of them. So do you see that kind of interacts then, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and I think it goes back, to what the sages have always taught, know thyself. It's really the key to everything in life.
Right.
And so I wanted to read some of the guidelines that you have for this life weaving thing. And I think they're really profound. One is every problem is a learning journey with a gift I can discover for others and myself. I can take all the time I need to calm my body and open my mind. That's huge. I can call on all the inner and outer resources I need. I can achieve a positive outcome to any problem. I am responsible for my life and solving the problems I experience. I am responsible for all my thoughts, words, and actions. Now, immediately, Jude, I'm imagining these posted in every classroom throughout the world as 6 things to live by. They are so, I love, especially, maybe you can elaborate on this one. I can take all the time I need to calm my body and open my mind.
Well, I tell you, it's really interesting. I'll tell you where, I guess even since I was young, I remember I started writing for the school news magazine when I was a junior in high school. And I remember I still have one of the articles I wrote that was talking about we need to stop and we need to take time. So I think that's probably been something that's been on my mind now. But I know when I was learning to do dream work, one of the approaches to dream work was when you go into the dream and you're trying to change the dream, that there are two things that this particular culture taught their children. And one is you can call on whatever help you want, and you can take all the time you need. And I thought, wow, that is a powerful, powerful intervention to say to anyone. I mean, what do we say to ourselves often or others? Like, hurry up, and we live in this kind of hurry up society. And I think about the Mad Hatter at the Tea Party, like no time to say hello, goodbye, I'm late. And I think that if you say to yourself and to anybody else too, take a breath and tell yourself, I have all the time. And I tell people, even if you can't believe it, it's okay if you can't believe it, but just say, if I could believe it, I want to believe that I could take all the time I need. Because if I can say to myself, I have time to do that, immediately the shoulders go down. I take a breath. It's like, oh, I have time to do this, right? So whether you're preparing for a test or whether you're trying to solve a particular problem or you're, in the midst of whatever it is that you're doing that could be stressful, if I say, you know what, take a breath, I have all the time I need. So I think taking that time that we need to calm our body and open our mind. So I think one of the programs that I've learned from Dr. John Leonard called the neurobehavioral program. We teach people to go to zero stress, and he calls zero stress peaceful readiness. So you think about that. That almost sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? That if I have no stress, I'm at zero stress, I'm peaceful, I'm calm and relaxed, but I'm ready. I'm alert, my mind's alert and awake. I'm ready to go. So think about it. If I'm taking my time, if I'm calming my body, then I'm opening my mind. Isn't that an interesting kind of thing that happens to us?
Yeah, that really reminds me of the dynamics of Tai Chi, because in Tai Chi,
yes,
instead of
exactly.
going for that hard, tense strike, you're really working to relax the body so that you're supple and you can move quicker and
yes.
You're just in this relaxed, peaceful state.
Yes.
Well, and
go ahead, Kathryn.
Well, I was going to say it leads me to the next one, which is I can call on the inner and outer resources I need. So, so often in schools, the kids ask, and what do? We say, okay, you're in timeout for 5 minutes. But we don't offer them tools. We just sit them in a chair.
Exactly.
So we need to give them the tools to calm their body and open their mind.
Right.
And, the breathing is one, but what are some resources that we could give these kids?
Exactly. So actually in the first book of the curriculum called Beginning the Journey, I have 2 guided imageries, and one is the tree imagery and one is the safe place. So exactly what you said, like if you're learning Tai Chi or yoga or any kind of martial arts, or if you're a musician or even in sports, what's the first thing you learn? You stand with your your feet parallel, just in right below your shoulders, and you take a breath into the diaphragm, and we say we're grounding. So I use the image of the tree. The tree is up culture. So you think about here. I've done this exercise with little kids, and I ask them, "Is it okay if I pick you up?" And okay, I can pick up a little child easily. So then I say, okay, they're just standing there. I say, I want you to imagine that you're a tree. And I want you to imagine that your roots are going deep, deep down in the earth, and your body's feeling heavier and warmer, and your roots are going deep, deep down into the earth. And then I try to pick them up. And I've had kids that are 5 or 6 or 7 years old that I could not budge. I couldn't pick them up. And I said, wow, you don't look like a tree. You don't have any roots coming out of your feet there. But what did you do? Oh, I imagined I was a tree, and I'm thinking I'm a tree, and I have roots going in my earth, and my body is getting heavier and warmer, and my roots are going deep into the earth. And guess what? Even though you didn't gain any weight, your body got heavier, and now I can't lift you up. And little kids are like, wow. So that's what you can do. That what you think and what you imagine creates this reality. It creates this way that things can be. It makes your body calm or excited or, whatever. So you're in charge. That's the first thing I want to teach kids with the idea of the tree is that you are in charge of your body. And if you can imagine that, of the tree. I know we have that, in yoga and various things, but it's like, kids love that, and like I said, I've used it with many children. I did a worked with my curriculum with an elementary school for 1 year at St. Francis Elementary School, and I taught it to the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers, and they also then taught it to their children. And it was really kind of cool to watch the educators figuring this out, learning how to do it, and then teaching their children how to do it. So you're giving kids practical, hands-on tools, which is good for us as adults. There's nobody that, from little bitty kids to adults that couldn't learn this idea. Imagine that I'm a tree, and that I've got my legs are kind of that, going in and going in the root. The middle part of my body is like the tree trunk and the tree body, and then my neck are kind of like the leaves and the branches. And so now I'm flexible. The upper part of my body is flexible and free, kind of as they call it, reaching to the heavens. So I'm connected, as they say, to Mother Earth. I'm connected to Father Sky. I'm that tree. So
that's beautiful, Jude. Well, we're gonna come up here right on the commercial at the break. So when we come back, we're gonna continue the discussion of this awesome life weaving education.
And so this is the bottom of the hour, going into a short break. While you're on the break, you can check out the Spirit's Journey page. We have archives there of other shows you can listen to later, as well as sign up to support the station. This is Spirit's Journey on Truth. Radio and Oneness Talk Radio, among others. And we are here today with Jude LaClaire, talking about many of her programs, including life weaving. So, Jude, welcome back to the second half.
Thank you.
And what are some of the goals of the life weaving curriculum?
Well, I think we've talked about some, but I think, number one, I do think that we all want our children, and any adult as well, to have a healthy sense of the self, okay? And that comes with being self-knowledgeable as well. And then we want to develop the ability for them to be more self-directed and self-regulating. So if we have, our children, and we're working them at home or in a classroom, and then you think of them as adults in life, you want people who can be doing what they're doing in a self-directed and a self-regulating way. Another thing we want to do, and it's a big right I try to teach, is that we want people to use their whole brain in communication and in their own development. And then as they have this whole kind of this more bigger sense of self, they're also learning how to connect with them to the resources of other people, other people, other living beings, the environment. In other words, that you're teaching them to access their internal resources, but also the external resources in terms of people, other living things, the environment, and so on. We're teaching them a skill of really discerning decision-making, recognizing their learning style, the learning style of others. And as they're doing this, they're also having it helps them focus better, concentrate, and have follow through, and then understand that all their actions have consequences. So I try to do very specific, kind of concrete ways for them to be able to themselves, with others, with the environment, with their, other resources of mentors and models in the society and so on, their dreams and imagery within themselves. So it's like their resources, the resources of the environment. So that's what it's big things, but I tried to make it specific and concrete ways for us to be able to do that.
So I wanted to go back to that point you said about kids need to learn to use their whole brain. So what came up in my mind when I think of whole brain is, okay, we have the conscious mind, but we also have the subconscious mind. What do you mean when you say whole brain, and do you recommend like brain gym to integrate the right and the left, or the inner and outer?
Yeah, I think all of those things that you just said, I think we can talk about. I talk a lot with people about brain development. When we're we only have about 60% of our brain developed. And most of that is what we would call the limbic brain, which is kind of our monkey brain or our dog brain. That's the brain that helps us that has sensory experiences and emotional experiences. And then we have the survival part of our brain, just like crocodiles and snakes. So until we're about 7 years old, that's what we do. So we want to really make sure that we're teaching people how to use that limbic brain, which is around sensory experiences and emotional experiences, right? And then what happens when we're around 7? We have that, what we call the frontal cortex, all right? So the frontal cortex is you probably know that already, of course, that it starts growing when we're about, and it really isn't finished until we're about 24, 25. So we're very slow-growing mammals, okay? And our brain is really slow-growing, too. So this is a great opportunity, though, to teach kids, the little people, to pay attention to that, the sensory process, the emotional process, using that. But to understand that little people, if you think you're going to rationally deal with little people, you're not. What they know is what gives them a reward, what gives them a consequence. They don't really get for sure right and wrong. We think they do, but they do not. Okay. So first of all, on the brain, yes, we think about the reptilian brain, the sort of the limbic brain, and the frontal cortex. And so we're really helping them to teach, to use all of that. Now, then we can also look at another model to say what we have that's conscious awareness and what we have that is not what we call the unconscious, right? And so this is real interesting to me that, as we learn more brain science, it kind of validates what really thousands of years of teachings of various cultures have told us. And that is that about 90 to 95% of our actions are really powered or driven by the unconscious. And only about 5 to 10% of what we do is driven by consciousness, by, in the moment, practical, this is what, yeah. So, wow, doesn't that's just like, woo, really? So that really gives us, we better know what's in there, right? We better know what's running around inside there that we're not aware. Okay.
Yes.
So Carl Jung used to say, basically the trick, what we want to do is bring things from the unconscious to consciousness, and then we have choices. Then we have choices about what we do with it.
Okay. I love that. Yeah. And I know Brain Gym is one of the things for kids that helps them with this limbic brain, interweaving the right and the left, and totally that's what we teach in metaphysics is, 95% of what's driving your life is coming from that unconscious. And so if you don't understand it, you're not going to understand the effects in your life, and you're going to go around, why me? Why did this happen to me again? Which kids do. So I think if we can start to teach them, you've got this unconscious that's driving you. And then, of course, at what age is it appropriate to begin? That's what I'm asking myself is how and at what age for kids through teens do we help them uncover this unconscious? I mean, as adults, we work with a lot of modalities, breath work, counseling, but how do we do this with kids?
Well, I do think a lot through one of the tools I use is imagery. So you can think about either guided imagery, like I have I have a guided imagery of the tree imagery or the safe place. I have a guided imagery for thinking and intuition, and sensing and feeling and so on. But there's also spontaneous imagery, their imagination. I was listening to this very interesting thing on 60 Minutes last week, and one of the persons that was being interviewed, who had been a survivor of the Holocaust, at 9 years old, his parents were being arrested. His father told him, run. And he did. He ran, and he ended up finding this older couple that he lived with. And he was in their attic for 3 years. And they asked him the question, what did you do to survive for 3 years by yourself as a little 9, 10, 11-year-old child in the attic, seeing somebody once a day for a meal, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, I lived in my imagination. I made up stories, and I was the hero of these stories. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. That's spontaneous imagery, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. That reminds me of a prisoner of war. I think it was during Vietnam, but he was just in this tiny little cage. It was not even big enough really for him to stand up in, and he was in there for years. And he said that how he survived was that he liked to play golf, and so he would just imagine playing the golf game over and over again.
Yes. No, I think that one thing that children, I really encourage the use of is their imagination, whether you use it in art or music or, drawing or movement. And also, I don't see children much anymore. But I did. And I always had, drawing materials. I always had clay. I had toys for them to play with. And then I would just let them open. I'm working with them, and whatever seems to be coming up through their play, then I'm going to be paying attention to that. And they would tell you so much about who they were, what they thought, what they felt, what they were scared of, what they liked, what made them happy. So I think if we pay attention to using and teach, here's what, that's natural for children. So we want to channel it. We want to teach them how to use it. We don't need to imagine. Okay, we need to make sure we're not interfering with them imagining. Okay, daydreaming has a bad rap, doesn't it?
Yeah, right.
What we know, you probably know this as well, is that our brain, our sleeping and our waking brain has a 90 to 120 minute cycle. And so basically when we have about 20 minutes when we're, doing a kind of repair of our brain, and we're in a alpha theta, altered state of consciousness. And that happens about maybe 60 minutes, maybe 90 minutes. We can be active, direct, doing a function that, demands kind of maybe something, a focused consciousness. And then, you start to yawn, and you get a little restless. You have to go to the bathroom. You get distracted. And what is your brain telling you? I'm ready to go in to that more healing. It's called the ultradian rhythm of the brain. I'm ready to go into that ultradian healing rhythm of the brain where I'm really just kind of daydreaming.
Healthy.
Okay? So we're in our society, we don't have much room for that, do we?
Oh, I know. It's always go, go, go. And we feel,
right.
Well, at least I do.
Right.
I feel guilty when I say, I need to take a break. I feel like I don't have time to take a break.
Exactly. But it's actually one of the books by Ernest Rossi is actually called Taking a Break. And the ultradian rhythm of the brain, where we do this about 90 minutes where we can do something focused and, and then we need to take at least 5 minutes. It'd be nice if we could take 20 minutes, but the brain, if we're just like nowadays when we're not as much of a structure, we're probably honoring that ultradian better, where we're allowing ourselves to do a focused task, and then we take a break. We go get a snack, we take a walk, we maybe do a little stretching, we, take a little tiny nap or whatever we need to do, and we let that alpha theta brainwave state where we do that sort of, imagery state, if you will, it's kind of a dream imagery state, where we kind of allow ourselves to go into that state of consciousness, because that's where we revive ourselves. That's where we energize. That's where we problem solve. And so when you're using things like guided and spontaneous imagery with adults or children, you're helping them to honor those rhythms of their brain, so that they need to go into that sort of daydream state. We all do. And in that state of consciousness, we sometimes think of what happens. We sometimes get the answers to problems.
Paradox, we think, if I take a break, I'm going to be less productive. But in reality, if we honor these ultradian rhythms, which I remember studying years ago, we actually become more productive because, like you said, you can get insights that could save you hours of work, forcing your brain to think when it needs a break.
Yes, absolutely. So when we talk about whole brain, we're talking about those parts of our brain, we're talking about the conscious, unconscious, and we're also talking, okay? And at night, we go into that lighter sleep state, which is typically that alpha theta, and we're usually dreaming. We call it the REM state, rapid eye movement. And then we go into a deeper sleep state where we're not dreaming often, and then we come up again. And again, it's a 90 to 120-minute cycle at night where we're going from that lighter sleep, dream sleep, to the deep sleep state and back up. Where in the waking state, we're going from, the state of consciousness where we're more focused and problem solving, so on, and then we're going to the alpha theta dream imagery state. So that's really kind of interesting that we've only in the 50s we thought of it in the sleep. In the 70s we realized, guess what, we're doing it in the day too. So that's the brain is really kind of an amazing and it's, when I say whole brain, I'm also talking about what we call body mind, that I'm paying attention to the whole body mind. So if we can teach children that, just think how far ahead we are.
So are a lot of these processes also done when we're meditating?
I would say so, yes. I think the mindfulness practices and the meditations, and some people are very good at that. Some people find that it's hard for them, their mind wanders, so it's easier for them if they have a guided imagery, or they have, they can maybe do it. You could be exercising and be in a meditative state. You don't have to be sitting physically still to do that. So I think there are some people that do better maybe by walking or running than they would by sitting. Okay. So I think that, maybe somebody else likes to cook and they get into that trance state. You think about, the word dream, imagery, trance, meditations, mindfulness, hypnosis, they're all the same thing, right? So you're absolutely right. They're all the same thing. They're all inviting us to go into that different state of consciousness, right?
Right. When you were describing that state of this focused awareness meditation where you don't try to control your thoughts, you just really focus on staying in the moment and just consciously observing everything that's going on and listening to everything that's going on.
Yeah. So one of the things, Jude, that as we were learning about you, you say that one of the important part of your process comes from this idea of teaching emotional and behavior resilience, which one of the authors, Chrissy Pozatek, who wrote Brave Parenting, a Buddhist-inspired guide to raising emotionally resilient children, she says, life's journey as a trail, a rocky path symbolizing all of the challenges we face in everyday life struggles with family and friends, with school, or with pursuits outside of the home, or simply the difficulties of managing the fluctuations of thought and emotions. And I wondered, would you share this beautiful Buddhist story that she tells?
Right.
About
Right. In this, I actually haven't met her yet. I just read her book, and I actually did email her, and we're going to talk with each other, but I haven't talked with her yet. But anyway, she talks about this Buddhist story in which the sage or wise person says that we can either lay down a path that's leather, to cover the path so our children won't, stumble or fall, or we can teach them so that they can be protected from the sharp stones. So if you think about, either we do it for them, which is, that over kind of functioning thing that we kind of do sometimes with children.
The helicopter parent.
We can teach them, the helicopter parent. We can teach them to do it for themselves. And right now it's interesting. I have several 18-year-olds and a 20 and a 22-year-old young people. And I love dealing with young people. But one of not sure why. There's a lot of reasons culturally, I think, why. I think they have not learned how to deal with difficulties very well and struggles. Maybe their lives in some ways have been a bit easier, and they also have a lot of too much information coming at them. And so as I'm teaching them these self-calming skills, I'm teaching them how to reduce stress, negative emotions, how to do some of the things I'm talking to you about, it's kind of begin to see them blossom, be more confident, less anxious, less depressed, and more resilient.
Yeah, actually, circling back to Albert Bandura, one of the quotes in your article, people who have a sense of self-efficacy bounce back from failure, and they approach things in terms of how to handle them rather than what can go wrong.
Yes. So I think it's interesting. I mean, I joke about this. I said when I was a kid, it was like little kids were to be seen and not heard. Now I'm an older person, and it's like all the younger people are like, oh, everybody should be young, and we should focus on youth. I'm going, wait a minute. But I think that one of the things there were some certainly good things about. Not so good things about the way I was raised, but what I learned was like, you got a problem, you figure out how to do it. We were given a lot of responsibility at a very young age to do many, many things. And that was good because we learned how to do things. And I think sometimes because of the speed of our lives, because of how we've gone in our educational systems and many parents working, we're not asking children to take responsibility in an age-appropriate way. They're having too many things done for them, and it's not blaming anyone. It's just been an artifact of how we live. But it hasn't served them well. That's my point. It does not serve anybody well to not learn how to be self-sufficient, to be responsible, and then be able to feel like they have this self-efficacy, this ability to say, oh, this is a problem, I can deal with this, I can do this, right?
Yeah.
Instead of worrying about it, being anxious about it, kind of folding up in a ball and what can I do? What can I do? We don't want our children to do that. We want them to have that self-efficacy. So I think we need to, so go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just ask, do you think that we hear a lot about the millennials, and actually there was a generational researcher who was talking about there's a divide between the millennial one group who have gained real world traction, as he calls it. They're able to get out and support themselves and kind of work a normal job and be able to support themselves. But then there's this whole other group in that generation where he says they can't get real world traction. They end up living with their parents into their 30s. They can't really hold down a meaningful job that will support them or their family, things like that. Do you think maybe that sense of self-efficacy, excuse me, my tongue's getting a little tied there, efficacy is related to that?
I do, and I think that we've also had, it's like people of your age, people of my age, we've done better than our parents, typically, financially, economically, and so on. But these children are coming into a world in which they're not going to. They're not going to are economically or financially. It's a different world. And they have the expectation that they should have things be a little easier. They should be able to have it done because that's what they grew up with. And I think, like I said, there's no blame here. It's just the way, it's an artifact of how we have been living. And so we need to teach our children that yes, there's difficulties, and every age is different. Every time in the era of the world is a different one. And like you said, some of these kids are rising to the challenge. They're working with things like, climate change and, conservation and people getting along with each other and diversity and so on. And some of the others are feeling very overwhelmed by it, which is probably true of people in general. But I do think that we can help these folks that are having a little more difficulty by teaching them some of these skills. It's never too late. I teach them to people of all ages. Doesn't make a difference if somebody's 5 or 50. I don't care. And I have clients of all ages, really, literally, from young to very old. And
this is a
these
great
are the
time.
skills we need to learn.
Yeah, and this is a great time, Jude, for you to tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to use your counseling skills.
You can, well, my website is heartlandholistic.com, and anybody can look up any information there. And there's actually there's a little picture of the mandala. I don't have the curriculum. That's one of my goals is to get it online as an ebook. I do have copies of it for people that I could still give, and I'm giving some copies to people as well, and sending them to people. Or they can just email me at my website, my email, drjude@heartlandholistic.com, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody's questions, or would like to get maybe you'd like a copy of the curriculum. In fact, locally the people, I'm just giving them to people because I'm preparing to get them online as an ebook, and I do not have the imageries. They were CDs. I don't have them on CD any longer because I don't have any way to get them made, and I will get them online as like iTunes at some point. But that's the best way to get a hold of me is probably just look at the website or email me at drjude@heartlandholistic.com.
Excellent. And I'm curious, what about using this curriculum for teens, the high school, middle school, where we know there's a ton of problems in those ages in addition to middle, elementary?
Well, I would, I haven't done as much of that in the last number of years, but I would definitely, when I started out and I wrote this and then I published it in 90, actually, I was I was disappointed. I traveled all over the place and went to an educational conference in Toronto. I was really going, and I really was sort of disappointed that by the mid to late 90s, people were really closing, they were not interested in these ideas. And so I got somewhat discouraged. But my idea was to be able to teach these things to educators, to teachers who are interested, to school systems that might be interested. And so, yes, I haven't done a lot of that in the last number of years, but that's something I would certainly be open to. And I do think that some people that are doing homeschooling or small private schools, some parochial schools, I do think that those people might be more interested in these ideas and in teaching them to the children of all ages, really, elementary, middle, and high school, because they're applicable. I've done work with middle school kids with this. I've done work with high school kids. I teach it to my clients who are 18 years old, 20 years old. I teach it to people of all ages.
All right. Well, Jude, thank you for being on the show with us, and thank you for all those of you who are listening with us. This is Spirit's Journey,